My next reason for optimism with this Bills team is the wide receiver room. And amidst everything that I kind of already talked about with Cole Beasley requesting a trade, Emmanuel Sanders likely retiring, Isaiah McKenzie being a free agent, and whether or not we want him back, and if we did want him back, what that price tag might be. So this one is kind of similar to the defensive line for me, that it's kind of a strange reason to be optimistic when it seems like we've had a stable of receivers for the past few seasons, and now we're kind of looking at Diggs and Gabe Davis and possibly not much else there. The reason I get excited here is, while I love Cole Beasley and I would love for him to be back on the right deal, I think he kind of came in and alongside John Brown kind of served their purpose for what we were looking for in that veteran receiver that could kind of help bring along Josh Allen in his early years. We went from street free agents in Josh Allen's rookie year. We brought in Kelvin Benjamin, and just the upgrade in talent really kind of helped Josh Allen's development. And it's not to say that I don't think Josh Allen needs top talent at wide receiver at this point. I think it definitely would still be beneficial, but I do think he's gotten to the point as a quarterback where he has the ability to elevate the receivers that you put out there. We've seen this with, Tom Brady and the Patriots. How many no-name receivers did they have that, kind of had career years with the Patriots and went elsewhere because Tom Brady was able to make them better players. But the reason I'm excited here is, if we do have this change in talent, in particular with Beasley requesting a trade, because I was kind of banking on him being back next year, I think that this kind of possibly forces Bean's hand in being a little bit more aggressive with acquiring a receiver. And I do still think we bring in an Emmanuel Sanders type player, somebody that's getting a little bit older that, wants to chase a ring, get one more contract, play with a great quarterback. But I think the significant possible losses at the position might also prompt them to put that as more priority free agent signing, possibly addressing it a little bit earlier in the draft. And I'm thinking about, sitting at pick 25 and, even in the second round, third round, some of the receivers coming out in this draft, if you were able to really, hit on a stud that could play against Stephon Diggs for the next 4 or 5 years or so and continue developing in the pipeline there, while bringing in cheap labor with Josh Allen's contract kicking in, I think that the news of this Beasley requesting a trade might kind of accelerate that time frame and maybe make it happen a year earlier than we expected. Also looking through the depth chart, some of the guys that we haven't really seen yet. Isaiah Hodgins, who he's been a camp darling. He struggled with some injuries. When he came out, he was, by a lot of people's metrics, supposed to be a better receiver than Gabe Davis. It doesn't always pan out that way, but knowing that the pedigree is there and we haven't really been able to see him in live action, maybe he was just a bust. Maybe, he's been developing quietly and we see him kind of play a big slot role this year and take a little bit of a workload to bring to the team. Also looking at a guy like Marquez Stevenson, he's got that blinding speed, and we only ever really saw him come in last year for some spot duties at return, where he struggled. Maybe that's not the position that we see him in. But getting some opportunities to be that speed threat, maybe McKenzie walks out the door and we see Stevenson used in some of those jet sweeps, some of the field stretching, being a man beater. Just having him in the building for 1 year and not really getting a great look at him, maybe with some of these possible departures, we get to take an extended look at Marquez Stevenson, and maybe he does have that talent to stick around. I think it's going to be a combination of, like I said, a free agent coming in. Cordarrelle Patterson is somebody that I have my eye on. I know he's a little bit older, and his season last year was kind of, the anomaly in his career. But we're talking a guy that really did everything, and if for nothing else but to shore up the punt return and kick returning duties and do some gadget plays, that's somebody that I'd be interested in bringing into the building as kind of that little bit older veteran that can just have some steady play and be smart with the ball in the return game. And then I'd be looking to draft somebody maybe in one of the top 3 rounds. There's a lot of needs on this team when you look at the defensive line, the cornerback situation with Levi Wallace being a free agent and Trey White likely to miss at least part of the season next year. We're pretty thin there. D-tackle, maybe offensive line. But I think wide receiver is one of the most important positions on this team with a quarterback like Josh Allen, where your offense can, score 30, 40 points, win a shootout. Maybe the defense can take a little bit of a backseat to make sure that pantry is full of receivers for Josh Allen. This offense has shown that, and there could be some tweaking coming with Dorsey, but I expect to see a pretty similar offense where it's very wide receiver based. You get Dawson Knox in the mix, who I almost kind of consider, like half tight end, half receiver, with the way he can move. But just the opportunity that we have of Gabe Davis kind of being forced into a bigger role at this point, and then being able to retool some of the depth there. And like I said, it's kind of strange to say because going into the season the last couple of years, it's been, one of the most intriguing camp battles has been like wide receiver 5, 6, 7, and how many are we going to keep, and who's going to do what roles on special teams and whatnot. And this year, I think it's going to look different, where we're kind of just rounding out that 5th receiver, maybe a 6th one, with special teams duties. And I think what happens this off season will really give us a chance to make significant improvements, but also show us, if we don't see Isaiah Hodgins this year, he doesn't have it. With all the situations going on with receivers possibly leaving, if we don't see Stevenson this year, I'm not optimistic for his future. So I think this kind of also forces the team's hand in really evaluating what is currently on the roster and what moves we have to do, what moves we have to move making going forward. And like I said earlier, with Josh Allen's contract numbers about to start hitting, the idea of signing some of these receivers that come up in free agency, and I had a buddy this past weekend talking to me about, is Dallas really going to cut Amari Cooper, and would you be interested in for the Bill? Like, yeah, any team out there would be silly to say that they wouldn't be interested in Amari Cooper. But the reality of the situation is the cap numbers that we're up against, and Josh Allen's contract kicking in, and possibly having to extend Edmonds, and Stephon Diggs is due for a raise. Going after these top names in free agency at receiver, it's right up there with like cornerback and defensive end. These top flight receivers go for about $20 million a season, and it's really just becomes unrealistic. So I like the idea of having to draft some young guys and get them in the building, and being able to fill out the roster that way and really draft and develop and re-sign your own guys. And I think that we still see that aging veteran signing this year. But that probably ends up being the end of needing to do that. You have veteran leadership in guys like Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs at that point, and that ends up being like the savvy veteran voice in the room that you bring in with an Emmanuel Sanders, a Cole Beasley. So I think all of these things compiled together. At a first glance, it kind of looks like we're in a much worse situation than we were last year, which honestly, as it stands right now, we very well could be. But the idea of there being the opportunities and the swings at the plate that we can take to make a position group that was already great on this team into an even bigger strength. And that is why I'm looking forward to the receiver group going forward and what it looks like.